Kenya has recently witnessed a unique series of protests, distinct from typical political demonstrations. These protests, known locally as Maandamano, initially focused on the rejection of the country's 2024 financial bill. Now, attention has shifted to Ruto's removal, police brutality, corruption, and politicians' broken promises and lifestyles. Despite lethal police crackdowns, citizens are refusing to cower in fear, and led by Gen Zs, they are demonstrating in outrage. This is a reflection of a growing concern about the high cost of living, persistent governance issues, corruption, foreign debt, and an increasing inflation rate. The country's escalating debt and its impact on service delivery and the economy have been a major worry. And while President Ruto made lots of changes in response to the aggression, he came out on the evening of June 25 to demonstrate protesters as criminals and treasonous. Now, can these protests force President Ruto out where a constitution governs the state? If they can or can't, what next? Today, I'm joined by Tele Nzomo, who is a political analyst. He joins me from Nairobi, Kenya, to discuss this. Tele, thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, what are the so many sins of President William Ruto so bad that Kenyans want him out?
The issue started last year with the finance bill at the time. So the biggest problem over the last 3 years where he's been president has been the issue of the economy. There has been a steady rise in the cost of living, and last year's finance bill was actually going to increase that cost of living, and that is what became the trigger for the protests that we saw last year. And as things have gone on since last year, the issue of the cost of living, the issue of the economy has really not been fixed. But above that, we've seen government respond to the Gen Z cries and protests by trying to silence them. First of all, we saw abductions after the last year's protests and also this year. And in the last few weeks, alone, we had 2 cases of individuals of extrajudicial killing. 2 individuals were killed in the hands of the police. So these are the issues that have really led the Gen Zs to want him to leave office.
Oh, you talked about the finance bill a while ago, and according to reports, it aimed to streamline the revenue collection, improve a business environment in the country, and of course, foster innovation driven by economic growth in Kenya. One would have thought that this finance bill will bring about growth and the betterment of businesses and people in Kenya.
I think the issue was that the fact that the finance bill was bringing or was adding taxes. We're talking about the 2024 finance bill. There's also been a lot of people who have had issues with the finance bill that was passed this year. We saw the Kenya Association of Manufacturers having issues in regards to some of the taxes that were being proposed. The issue that we've had as a country on matters to do with the economy has been mostly on a spending. On the side of spending. It's been mostly on budgetary issues. We've been spending so much as a country. The size of government has grown so much since William Ruto took over. In fact, one of the promises that he made after last year's protest was that he was going to reduce, for example, the wastage that we were seeing in government, for example, by reducing the number of advisors that he had in government. Now, his own office, the office of the president, has seen an increase in advisors since last year alone. And also we've seen an increase in the size of government, especially with the number of state departments that have been there. So the issue of the economy has been mostly about budget, the fact that we have been really overspending and spending on things that maybe we should not be spending on. And the finance bill, which then aims to collect revenue to support that budget, has been hurting a lot of Kenyans with the additional taxes.
So aside from wastage in spending and the government turning a deaf ear to the plights and the complaints of Kenyans, we're also hearing issues around corruption. How corrupt is Ruto's regime, according to your experience?
So we seem to have had a number of corruption cases, a lot of which have not actually, none of which has been, prosecuted. We had issues with fertilizer, for example. So corruption cases in this country have been quite high. The Auditor General has been reporting misuse of funds. Has been reporting the misuse of funds in government, and this has led to. He's been reporting issues of misuse of funds. So there has been clearly, a huge corruption that we've seen in the country since William Ruto took over. Corruption has been a big problem for a long, long time, and every single administration has been promising to get rid of corruption, but that never seems to happen. And we seem to see the same practice going on under the current leadership.
So it means that the issue around corruption is not strictly tied to William Ruto's administration. It's something that has been on. Are there institutions or people that are actually enabling corrupt practices without any form of consequences in the country?
So we do have independent institutions that are meant to, that are meant to ensure that corruption doesn't take place, or that are meant to prosecute. We have the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. The Directorate of Criminal Investigation as well has its role to play in as far as getting evidence and finding evidence of corruption. And then we also have the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, which then takes the matters to court. I think what we have seen is the fact that, you do need a lot of political goodwill. And this has been the case, as I said, for several administrations, that if government does not have the goodwill, the independence institutions have not really been as independent as they should be. We find a situation whereby government seems to hijack or to take away that independence. And so the issues that are going to be prosecuted are the issues that government want to be prosecuted. And that some of these commissions, either their hands are tied, or the people who are put in those positions are unwilling to prosecute the powerful people or the people in high office.
And now we see people on the ground being defiant against government orders and, of course, boots on the streets, willing to quell this particular unrest. Now, how brutal has the police and, of course, some other security personnel been since these particular demonstrations began?
So that has actually been one of the biggest issues that we have seen since last year's protest. It's been the response by security agencies to the protests. As I mentioned, you have to understand that the protests have not just been physical. We've also seen, people go online and speak up against government, and we have seen people, as I mentioned earlier on, who have been abducted, And as I said, recently we saw issues of extrajudicial killing. In fact, last week when there was, but one rather, where we had a protest, one person, Boniface was actually shot, and the video was taken. He was shot, and unfortunately, I think he passed in the last few days. So we have seen people die because of how the police have reacted to this. And one issue that is really becoming problematic in this country now is the relationship between the police and the Kenyan people. I think that a lot of the Kenyan people now do not have a lot of trust in the police. We saw recently. The Cabinet Secretary for Interior actually urged police to, if people were coming to have demonstrations in police stations, that the police should respond by actually shooting those individuals. So the relationship between the police or the security agencies in Kenya and the people is really, really fractured, which is a very serious thing to have in any community or in any country.
And talking about trust, is it true that politicians have equally failed the people?
Yes, politicians have definitely, and I want to just be clear on this. It's politicians on both sides of the divide. When you talk about, as I said, the trigger to this last year was the finance bill. The finance bill is something that is actually, a prerogative of the National Assembly. Of course, the executive has its role to play, but the National Assembly has a role as an independent institution and independent organ of government to work. And we've seen the National Assembly really fall under the government. And we saw now a collaboration between William Ruto and Raila Odinga, who leads ODM. And those are the two largest parties that we have in Kenya right now. So we have a situation where we have the government and the opposition party actually working together in office, and this makes it very challenging to hold government to account. So, government now has, without the institutions, without an opposition, government can do anything it wants to without being held to account properly by political institutions.
And it's quite interesting that the government, while defending the bill, came out to say that the finance bill was meant to ensure tax relief and ease the burden on workers. I don't know if that is a story that didn't sell.
Yeah, it didn't sell because I think that was their narrative and not necessarily the truth of them. But I think that going on, and this started really when William Ruto came into office. If you look at all finance bills that he's had, he's been constantly increasing the taxes that have been there. He's been putting in measures to increase taxes on, for housing, something that has been very controversial in this country. There was an issue on healthcare, which was, again, very controversial by increasing the amount of taxes that was collected on that. And this has continued up until where we are. I think there's been a lot of taxes that have been increased. Government has tried to sell a particular narrative that, they're trying to they're trying to raise money so that they can support those in the bottom half, in the bottom of the pyramid in the country. But it's not something that has worked because people are not feeling. The thing with the economy is that if the economy is doing well, if the cost of living is well, then people will feel it, and people are not seeing it translate to their livelihoods.
Okay, now, Tele, this protest is largely led by young Kenyans, popularly called Gen Zs, those born in the late 90s and in the early 2000s. Do these people really fully understand the implication of this revolution that they are championing, or what it might degenerate into if they stay persistent on it?
I think what we're going to see is that we're going to now start seeing a shift. I think, yes, there will be people expressing their dissatisfaction with government, but I do not think that it will go to the point where they're seeking to remove the president unconstitutionally. I think we're going to now see a shift from, simply saying that they're protesting on the streets, or simply saying they're, making statements or social media, what they do on social media, trying to put pressure on government. And now they're going to look at 2027, which is the next election. And I think we're going to start seeing civil society organizations, some of the activists now start focusing on getting young people to register to vote, getting young people to, ensuring that the Electoral Commission is prepared for the next election. I think we're getting to a point where now the focus is going to shift really from largely being a street issue to being an election and a ballot issue. I think everyone in the country now I don't think anyone in the country believes that William Ruto is going to go anywhere before 2027. I think at this point, everybody is just putting pressure on the government, trying to ensure that the policies that the president is putting in are people-friendly, hopefully trying to change some of the policies that he's putting there. But in as far as the president leaving office, I think this is something that will take place in 2027. I think this is something that will be done, if it is to be done, will be done through the ballot. And I expect that moving forward to be the focus of the young people who are activists and who have been leading this protest, the government itself, because I fully expect that the president has started preparing for that election, and even the opposition that is now being led by the former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua. I think the focus now will be on 2027 election.
Now, Tele, we've seen protests in Lamu, Lodwar, Rift Valley, Central Kenya, Nairobi, and of course, even in the president's hometown. Now, is it a general consensus that if they do not wait for 2027 elections now, maybe, if possible, Ruto must go?
As I said, I think obviously the Ruto must go chants are everywhere, but I do believe that the consensus right now and what people believe is that change in this country will take place through the ballot, and it will take place in 2027. And I think now what we're seeing is really just, as I said, just putting pressure on government to act and to act, or to rather change, as I said, its policies, putting pressure on government to stop the police brutality, the extrajudicial killings. I think this is what those protests are for. But I think every person across the country has come to the realization, or has accepted that in this country, we're going to change the president if we're going to change the president, it's going to happen through the ballot. And the election itself is not going to be an easy election. The president is trying to put together a very strong coalition with the help, as it seems now, with the help of Raila Odinga. Of course, Kenyan politics can change very, very quickly in the next 2 years. But he's doing his best to put a very strong coalition to compete for that election. We are seeing, as I mentioned, the opposition being led by Rigathi Gachagua, Kalonzo Musyoka, and the rest trying to come together as well to put an alternative. We're also seeing now also alternative voices, such as our former Chief Justice, David Maraga. How well, Maraga will do, we will see in 2027. It depends also on the tribal dynamics of this country. I think Kenyan politics is still very tribal. It's also going to be interesting to see how the young people vote. First of all, we have had an issue in this country that for a very long time, young people have not really been participating in elections. The number of young people who actually registered to vote have been quite low. In the last election, it was quite low. The number of people who then went and voted was even lower. So it will be interesting to see. Yes, we're seeing young people now coming for protest. But it will be now interesting to see how many of them now move on and say, okay, they're going to get, they're going to get their voter registration, and now they're going to come out on election day and actually vote.
Well, the government at some point, while talking about the finance bill, had said that it wants to plug the budget deficit, of course, its finances. Now, I'd like to find out what the position or the state of the finance bill is as of now. I know that President Ruto at some point withdrew the bill to make adjustments when the uproar started last year. Has it been ratified? Has it been accented to? Is it going to be implemented anytime soon, or it has been stayed and taken away from the public domain?
So just to clarify something, in Kenya, the process is usually that each year we usually have a budget, and each year we usually have a finance bill. Now, that is actually something that some people have mentioned could be a problem, and one of the solutions that some people have proposed is that instead of having finance bills every single year, is having a sort of a finance bill that works for 5 years. But the initial finance bill was a 2024 finance bill, which the president then said that he was not going to sign. And in fact, at that point in time, they allowed it to die, natural death, so to speak. What was interesting was that a month ago or so, the leader of the National Assembly said that although that finance bill was not passed as it was, they had actually passed the contents through different pieces of legislation last year. Then again, this year we had a new finance bill, which is now the finance bill for 2025. The finance bill for 2025 was passed successfully in Parliament alongside the budget. It was to take effect on July 1st. We are waiting to see what the effect will be after it starts taking effect. I think that's a question we can answer maybe 2 months down the line to see whether or not it's helping close the deficit, and to see whether or not it's hurting Kenyans and hurting businesses.
Well, we've heard some analysts say that these protests are needless. A lot of people are saying that government promised jobs, not taxes. But then one would ask the question, how will the government create jobs without taxes, which is a major conduit for revenue?
Taxes can go two ways. Yes, you need taxes to ensure that government services are provided. But if you go to the point where you're overtaxing Kenyans and you're overtaxing businesses, it becomes a problem. I think that was one of the issues and that's the reason why some of the people that have had issues with these taxes, not just young people. If you look at, the National Assembly conducts public participation regarding all of any piece of legislation that comes before it. And some of the bodies that have actually been really against these pieces of legislation have been, amongst others, the Kenyan Private Sector Alliance, which is a body which is really the umbrella body for our our private sector. Also, the Kenyan Association of Manufacturers, who have really been complaining about the taxes that are being put on manufacturing on the manufacturing sector. So if you overtax Kenyans and you overtax businesses, it's going to it's obviously going to lead to either loss of jobs. You're going to start seeing companies either shut down, move to neighboring countries, or move to countries where they feel they have a better tax regime. Kenyans are not against taxation. Kenyans are simply saying that taxation needs to be fair, it has to make sense, and those taxes have to be used properly, and there has to be a level of accountability.
Now, the protest started peacefully, but now has degenerated into some sort of chaos. Would you say it has been hijacked because of the incidences of looting and vandalism that has been reported as of now? And of course, the question around if these protests should continue.
The protests have been, I would say, yes, they have been hijacked by the political class. As I said, we have two sides right now in the political class. We have the government side, and then we have what we can call the opposition right now. As I said, it's being led by the former deputy president who was impeached last year, led by our former vice president, former vice president, he was Kalonzo Musyoka, who was vice president in 2007 to 2012. So there are two sides of the political divide who I think have tried to hijack this protest. On one end, I think on the side of the opposition, which is now being led by Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, I think they have tried to want to be part of the protest, or to show that Kenyans, to use this protest to show Kenyans dissatisfaction with government and to also increase their popularity. Now, this has led to it was goons who have joined the protest. I would say nothing has been proven that they are tied to the opposition, but everything that we're seeing seems to point to the fact that there have been some politically sponsored people who have been joining the protest. Additionally, we have seen people who have joined the protest in support of government. Now, again, evidence seems to point to the fact that these people have been sponsored by people who are sympathetic or people who are allied to government. So I do think that the political class has definitely hijacked. I think the initial idea of what this protest was supposed to be peaceful protests led by young people in this country, led by young people to bring change into the country. But of course, the politicians have taken, I think, what we saw recently was really, really quite unfortunate. The amount of looting, the amount of businesses that were disrupted was quite unfortunate. But yes, this has been, I think, part of the plan of the political class to gain momentum for their reasoning. And of course, if you look at what has happened, is that after the violent protests that we saw now government coming up and bringing actually suggesting that they're going to bring legislation that is going to control or limit determine how protests are going to take place in this country. So the political class has definitely hijacked what the Gen Z started.
Okay, so it's quite obvious now that a cross-section of Kenyans are dissatisfied with this administration, but then President Ruto has called a bluff and has dismissed calls for its removal, questioning its legal basis and, of course, its practicality. But then when you look at the make of this protest and the way it's pivoting, do you think it can actually push him out?
No, it's not going to push him out. As I said, I expect that if William Ruto is to go, it will happen in 2027. It will happen through the ballot. I do not think where we are as a country that he's going to resign. He will not resign. That will definitely not happen. And I don't think these protests are going to get to the point where they actually force him out of office. Force him out of office. And you also have to accept that as he is, he also has support in the country, especially in his home area. The fact that I think one important thing that he did was to bring Raila Odinga on board. Bringing Raila Odinga on board in his government has really secured his position as president. I think without Raila Odinga, he would have been in a very vulnerable position. But now having that coalition of his party UDA and then the ODM party has really given him a lot of momentum and given him a lot of strength to be able to continue up until 2027, up until the next election.
But Raila Odinga was equally part of those that riled the citizens to kickstart these protests in the first place, most especially when the finance bill was first floated? Does it mean that he has realigned himself with the president, Ruto, or it's Ruto that's trying to clinch him so as to retain legitimacy as the president?
It's a bit of both. As I said, in politics, 1 year in politics is a really, really long time, and I think that's what we are starting to see. For William Ruto, he did need Raila Odinga, especially with the fact that his relationship with the then deputy president Rigathi Gachagua was falling, and so it seems as though he needed Raila Odinga. He went to Raila Odinga, and indeed Raila Odinga accepted to come and work with William Ruto. And even if you listen to his statements of late, although he has not fully condemned the protests per se, he has been very clear that people should be. He's been very clear that he thinks that this is something that will end up in an election. He's in support of government, although he says he's not part of government. He has people who are ODM or were ODM members who are now part of government, and I think that has been really important for William Ruto. So in this country, people change, sides very, very easily. Even right now, as we speak, anything can happen. People who I was speaking about being in the opposition could easily change sides and join the government by the time we reach 2027. That is the unfortunate state of Kenyan politics. We don't necessarily have, our political parties don't necessarily follow ideologies. It's not about ideology, it's about interest, and it's about where their interests are being served at that particular moment in time.
Earlier on, you said that the political class have equally failed the people, and President Ruto is saying that only the Constitution can effect his exit from power and not protests. How are we sure that the political, let's not even say the political, the legislature and the judiciary are not, let's use the word neutral now, are neutral to the situation playing out in Kenya, and they will be able to, probably when the time is right, effect justice, most especially as it relates to the people in Kenya?
I think for the legislature is not neutral. That I can tell you for a fact. The legislature has been, it has really been taken over by the executive. The executive runs the legislature, and this is part of the challenge that we've had as a country. The fact that if the government wants a certain piece of legislation to go through, it will go through and it will sail through. Majority of the people in parliament today are allies of William Ruto and allies of Raila Odinga. That gives them a lot of power, what in Kenya has come to be known as the tyranny of numbers. And that means that the legislature cannot work and it cannot be seen as an impartial body. I think since 2013, I don't think the legislature has really been an impartial body in Kenya. As for the judiciary, there's still hope that the judiciary can remain impartial. The judiciary has had its challenges in as far as corruption, but I can say that since 2013, because that was the time when the constitution was really being implemented, that was the first government that started to implement the constitution. The judiciary, I think, has been the one body that has really defended the constitution. It has ruled certain amendments, certain constitutional amendments to be illegal. I think it has come out to defend this constitution very heavily. But I think another institution that you're not necessarily mentioning, and I think this is where the biggest question will come into place, is the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission was just appointed, or rather was sworn in recently. This is a problem because, first of all, they have only 2 years to get ready or to prepare for an election. There are questions as to whether the people in the commission are actually going to be impartial and work as impartial, as impartial arbitrators of the election. So that is a body that we are really looking at, and it will be interesting to see how they start working. They're still very new to office, so I will not judge them out the gate, but definitely looking at how they're going to proceed moving forward.
Well, thank you so much, Tele Nzomo, political analyst, for sharing your thoughts with us. A lot of people have actually talked about how united Kenyans are in demanding for justice and for the right things to be done by the Kenyan government. We'll hope that they will be resolute. But then, most importantly, that this crisis would come to an end and both the government and the people can jaw over the situations plaguing in the country. It was nice talking to you at this time. Thank you.